Okay, hello everyone. I can see we've got about 6 people who've joined us already. So welcome to the University of Portsmouth Cybercrime Awareness webinar that we're going to do today for you. My name is Theodore. I work at the University of Portsmouth Global Office. And today with me, I've got 2 of our academics in the cybercrime department. So we've got Vas and Lisa. Unfortunately, Lisa's webcam is not working today due to some technical difficulties, so you just have to enjoy the sound of her voice today. But I hope that still the webinar will be informative for you and you're going to find the information that we share with you useful. I'm just going to hold off for a couple more minutes to allow time for any people who are joining us late, and then we'll make a start on the presentation. There is also a chat option, so if you've got any questions for us, feel free to pop them in the chat, and then our academics will try to answer them for you.
Please do ask us questions. We're very keen to have a discussion and not make this just a boring webinar where we just talk on our own. We would love to hear your views and questions.
Okay, we've got a couple more people who've joined us, so I think it's a good time to start now. So as you can see on the slide, we've got the Spinnaker Tower on the left, which is the symbol of Portsmouth. So whenever you see that tower, just think about Portsmouth and our city. It is a great tourist attraction as well. A lot of people like to visit it, and there's a lovely cafe on the top, which offers a beautiful view of the seaside and the whole of Portsmouth as well. Just kind of a nice introduction for you there. So if I move on to the second slide and then ask Vas and Lisa to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Theodore. So hello everyone, welcome to the webinar. My name is Vasileios Karagiannopoulos. I'm a reader in Cybercrime and Cybersecurity at the Institute of Criminal Justice Studies at the University of Portsmouth. And I'll pass on to Lisa to introduce herself, and then we'll say what we do as well.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning or this evening, wherever you may be in the world. My name is Dr. Lisa Segura, and I'm a senior lecturer in criminology and cybercrime and the deputy director of the Cybercrime Awareness Clinic alongside Vaz, and I'm also the postgraduate program area leader for distance learning in the Institute of Criminal Justice Studies.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. And then if you just wouldn't mind telling us more about your research agenda. So maybe, Lisa, we can start with you.
Okay, so my research area is predominantly in the area of cybercrime, very much the human dimensions of it, so looking at online deviance. Particular area that I'm working on are things such as legal but harmful behaviours online, and that covers things like hate speech and harassment and the sorts of activities that might not necessarily have legislation attached, but they are still causing harms to people. I'm currently researching into the field of technology-facilitated sexual violence. So things such as what's colloquially known as revenge porn, but is more appropriately called image-based sexual abuse. And I also look at online subcultures that are propagating extremist ideologies, such as the incel and I've got a forthcoming book due early next year on.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Vas, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm the director of the Cybercrime Awareness Clinic that Lisa mentioned. We work on the clinic together. So this is an innovation and research facilitated project that has received funding from the local police, the National Cybersecurity Centre, the European Union, and research councils as well. And we focus on a variety of different topics that relate to cybercrime. So we have done research in relation to young people in schools and colleges, and we also offer cyber awareness advice and guidance for schools and colleges. So we go out to the community and we speak to young people, to parents, to college tutors about cyber awareness, and we help provide the more robust kind of strategy for cyber awareness on a local and regional level. We also focus on older people. So we go to older people community groups and we provide advice, and we've also done research in relation to cyber threats and victimization online in this particular group, which is very interesting, and we are currently preparing an academic paper to publish in relation to this research that we've done. Obviously we focus on cyber awareness and organizations. Our current work with the National Cybersecurity Centre focuses on SMEs. We have done some work previously when funded by the local police, but now this is more of a national kind of campaign in order to increase cyber awareness, and both ministries are heavily involved in this at the moment. Obviously, COVID has complicated things for organizations, as we will discuss. So this particular project has become much more important nowadays, I think. Another project I'm involved in is the impact on police officers that working in child online sexual exploitation cases can have. So we have spoken with police officers that work in this line of work, and we want to explore the psychological impact it has in terms of their moral beliefs and general beliefs about society. So this is really interesting, and we have some future plans as well. So we think COVID is a very important problem that will need to be researched from all sorts of different angles. So we're currently developing a project on COVID and the impact of misinformation in the public sector and on public servants. Some of our future plans also involve supervising PhD students in different areas of cybercrime awareness, and one of the projects that we're very keen on is cybercrime in the LGBTQI plus community. This is something that both me and Lisa are very interested in. So if you know anyone who's looking to do a PhD in this area, we would be very keen to supervise such a project, but obviously we're very open to supervising projects on all the other areas that we've mentioned as well. Finally, the EU project I mentioned relates to online and offline radicalization of young people in terms of engaging in violent extremism. And we are trying to increase their online critical thinking and awareness so that we can make them more resilient to grooming efforts that could lead them to paths that could result in violent political acts.
Okay, great. Thank you, Vas, for that. That sounds very interesting indeed. And then could you please tell us more about the areas that you specifically teach in?
Yes, so together with Lisa, we have developed a bachelor's in criminology and cybercrime. When it was launched a couple of years ago, it was the first bachelor's that combined criminology and cybercrime to an equal extent. So we have dedicated modules that focus on different topics of cybercrime, And I will mention, for example, I teach hacking and hacktivism, which is the use of hacking for political purposes. We have modules on digital forensics. So we talk about digital investigations and how police officers and other private investigators can find digital evidence and report digital evidence in court and all that. We focus on cybercrime law and human rights. Obviously, the internet is a big social space, so we explore the different kinds of crime and the relevant legislation from a UK and maybe EU or even US perspective sometimes. And we also discuss the different big issues relating to human rights and civil liberties, such as privacy, freedom of expression, freedom of information, freedom of access to information. So we discuss different topics like WikiLeaks, Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, filtering, and all that. We are talking about politics in cyberspace and regulating power conflicts in cyberspace. So this is a more advanced master's module that looks at regulating behavior online and the different ways you can manage to regulate behavior online. We focus on cybersecurity topics in terms of how organizations can protect themselves and what the threats are. And my personal favorite, which will start this year, it's a third-year module for the undergraduate, I mentioned, is crime and technologies, where we focus on the more futuristic types of crime that will develop in terms of the Internet of Things, robots, drones, and all the new advanced technologies, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and how these will relate to crime and policing. I think this is a very fascinating topic. So we teach on both the MSc in cybercrime and the BSc, I mentioned. And over to Lisa to tell us all the interesting stuff she's doing.
Thanks, Vaz. Okay, so yeah, Vaz has just mentioned that we also have a master's in cybercrime. This was the first master's to be looking at a logical approach to cyber. Everything else sort of took the sort of computing business perspective, sort of security, whereas we were the first to look at cybercrime in particular. And so our master's is part of our master's flexible framework. So it's where students can choose a particular pathway, and they can either graduate with a single or dual exit award, and cybercrime is very much part of that. And some of the subjects that I particularly teach are things like online deviance. So the sorts of harms I was talking about earlier, which obviously relates to my research. There's a specific optional module which looks entirely at the dark web, so deconstructing what that is, arise from that particular part of the web. I also look at things like cyberspace and subcultures, online gender abuse, technology facilitated sexual violence. I also specialize in things like online research methods, so the collection of online data and conducting research with participants online, and also the ethical connotations as well of conducting research in these spaces. And I also teach quite a great deal of criminological theory. That's sort of like my background as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa.
The next slide. Thank you.
So in the process of working on all these projects and doing all this research and public engagement activity that we mentioned, we have to engage with different stakeholders, and obviously Portsmouth City Council is one of the big stakeholders that we interact with, and they provide a lot of community services, so you can imagine it's really important for us to support the city through the City Council as well. We've already mentioned the National Cybersecurity Centre and how we collaborate with the National Cybersecurity Centre. So essentially we collaborate with all sorts of different levels of law enforcement, from local in terms of the Hampshire Constabulary to the regional organised crime units that support businesses and individuals in relation to cybercrime as well, all the way to the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is focused more on larger projects and more strategic projects as well. Lisa, would you like to tell us a bit more about the other stakeholders that we're interacting with? Lisa, can you hear us? I think we might have lost Lisa.
Yeah, I think there's some problem with the
connection. Yeah. Okay, I'll continue then, and she'll probably rejoin us. Ah, there she is, I think. Lisa?
Hello. Apologies.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So I don't know if you heard me, but I was describing the stakeholders, and I thought maybe you can tell us a bit more about the National Crime Agency and the rest of the stakeholders that we're interacting with.
Yeah, okay. So with the National Crime Agency, we've got contacts in the behavioural units as well. So the sort of people that are focusing on the more cyber types of crimes, and they were very keen to support our undergrad and master's courses when we initially set those up. Also work closely with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. So I'm working with them at the moment on looking at the forthcoming online arms legislation that will be introduced later this year. And I worked on a project previously with the Home Office, looked at the impact on victims of computer misuse. And I've also got contacts with Nominet, who are the UK domain registrar. And we also work with charities such as Aurora New Dawn, who do amazing work supporting victims of domestic and abuse and violence. Also other organisations that are doing work to tackle online abuse, such as Fix the Glitch and the Joe Cox Foundation. And I think both Vaz and I have got an extensive list of collaborators at national and international universities as well. And I think, I mean, that'll probably just take up some time if we just named them all right now.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Could you please both of you tell us more about how has the COVID changed the cybercrime landscape?
Yeah, so I can start, and then I know Lisa has a lot to say as well. So Lisa, please feel free to jump in.
Thanks.
So obviously, the biggest issue that everyone keeps discussing is the home working. So over the course of I guess the past 3 months, we all started working from home to a large extent, apart from obviously critical frontline stuff. But this has obviously introduced huge challenges because we weren't prepared to do that. A lot of us weren't. I guess academics are perhaps a little bit more prepared because we tend to work from home often, but there were many people in the university itself, but also around us, that had to transition to an online working environment, working from home, very, very quickly and abruptly, without being practically and psychologically prepared for it, I think. And many of those people also had to combine that with childcare, because obviously the schools closed down, so they had to homeschool children and at the same time manage the home working process. And I don't know about you attending the webinar, but I think this is the 10th different platform I have used for engaging with people online, from the very traditional kind of Skype and WhatsApp platforms all the way to these very elaborate webinar style platforms that can support hundreds of people. Lisa, any comments from you on that?
Oh, well, I think that's probably why I'm experiencing so many problems. I've not used GoToMeeting prior day, and as we can see, it's not particularly compatible with my computer, unfortunately. So apologies for that. Yeah, so just to reiterate a lot of what Vaz said, really. I mean, obviously, it's the increased use. It's the fact that more people are online now creates further opportunities for cybercrimes. So, for example, an independent research organisation, Catch-22, found that 70% more time, people are spending more time online due to the COVID situation. And just to give you an example, so Ofcom have found that TikTok, which is a bit of an obscure platform predominantly used by younger people, prior to COVID had 5 million users. It's now got 13 million users and a much wider demographic. I think there's a lot of parents embarrassing their children on that particular platform at the moment. Don't know how much of a cybercrime risk that is, or either just a risk to personal embarrassment. But so obviously what we're seeing is that with more life moving online harms are increasing. We're seeing evidence of increasing reports of abuse, more case studies of all sorts of different crimes, including things like fraud, exploitation, harassment, abuse, and I think as well, we also need to consider the fact that there's more children online as well. And of course, with the increased amount of time children are online, there's increased opportunities for abusers to exploit and groom them as well. So what we're seeing is that with coronavirus, there's almost like the threefold perfect storm, that more people are online, but actually there's reduced moderation. There's that increased demand. So because obviously children and people are at home, we're using devices more due to loneliness, boredom, trying to just stay in touch, have that human contact. And then we've got that increase in those threat effects with offenders looking to exploit the crisis. Just another statistic I've come across. I'm full of them today. Internet Watch Foundation have reported that there are increased attempts to access child abuse content since we've been in lockdown, which I think is pretty horrifying. So it's just lots of increased threats and vulnerabilities.
I guess one of the main threats that we keep seeing from an organizational level as well is attacks on critical services. So research labs that are doing research in relation to COVID, hospitals and other healthcare providers, and even educational platforms. So there's different criminal groups online that use ransomware, which is essentially a virus that infects your system and then encrypts all the data, locks you out of your system, and then requires you to pay ransom for it to be unlocked. Sometimes you might pay the ransom and it's not even unlocked, and the advice is not to pay the ransom and seek support from law enforcement. But many organizations find that they really want to go back online as quickly as possible, so they take a risk and they pay the ransom. Initially people thought that the ransomware groups would just stand back and be more humane, but unfortunately what has happened is that they found this opportunity to attack services that were very critical and would be very keen to continue their urgent work and obviously more keen to pay. So they're attacking those infrastructural services at the moment, and 80% of the cyber attacks, according to a Verizon report in 2020, were actually ransomware attacks. Just to imagine, how big ransomware is at the moment. We mentioned there have been loads of breaches. So EasyJet recently reported a big data breach. And there have been other manufacturers such as Honda or a big alcoholic drinks company in Australia, I think Leon is the name, and we're talking about multi-million, if not billion-dollar organizations here. Lisa mentioned the risks of young people being online as well. I think this is really important to highlight, and also the increased opportunities for fraud and theft. A lot of cyber criminals have used COVID-related scams in order to trick people into buying things they shouldn't be buying, so like miracle cures or protective equipment that never arrives, or something that arrives is not what it's supposed to be. It was very expensive. Even with toilet paper, maybe you remember there was a toilet paper crisis when the lockdowns started across the world. So people were actually selling toilet paper at exorbitant prices, and then it would never arrive as well. And I think the main issue is the misinformation and disinformation that has been circulated. So we're all online. We're getting information online. And people have actually lost their lives because of misinformation online, where famous people and public personas have actually suggested that drinking alcohol in large quantities could prevent COVID from infecting someone. And I believe there were tens of deaths in Iran in relation to that. But also, there have been suggestions by politicians about using alcohol or even disinfectant to prevent COVID infections. So we can imagine this is quite important. Lisa, would you like to add something to that?
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously this is, again, it's people taking advantage of the fear at the moment. Obviously people are in a state of panic. We're in an unprecedented situation, as what keeps getting referred to, and so there are opportunities then for people to exploit that and further their own agenda. Whether or not it's for a joke, or whether or not it's for more egregious purposes, that that they're obviously trying to scam financially or just cause harm. We're seeing such an increase of this misinformation, and particularly around COVID. It's just about, like Vaz said, about the ways to protect yourself from the infection, or about selling products that are completely worthless. There's so much, but we've even seen that things like terrorist and extremist groups are utilizing the COVID crisis as well to further their own ideologies. So it has far-reaching implications.
Great.
Yeah, thank you for that. We've got a couple of questions which I think it's really good to address now, if you don't mind. So thank you, Eva, for all these questions that you've written in the box. So I think the one that's more relevant to what we've just talked about is, what do you think about the COVID-19 tracking tools? For example, vulnerability to data harvesting.
This is a
Vaz, do you want to take this? I think you might have some comments about privacy, maybe.
So yeah, I actually, when the track and trace app in the UK was being launched as a pilot on the Isle of Wight, which is a lovely island just across from Portsmouth. So if you visited Portsmouth, you have the opportunity to take the hovercraft and be there in 10 minutes and enjoy the island, which is lovely. So the government has picked the Isle of Wight for the track and trace pilot, and there were obviously quite a lot of concerns in relation to the track and trace app, purely because the UK decided to go a different way compared to Germany or France or some other countries. And actually have a centralized system for collecting that information, rather than a decentralized system, which was, I believe, developed by Google and other tech companies in collaboration with governments. So our track and trace app was supposedly run by the government and the National Cybersecurity Centre. There were safeguards for the initial information that would be collected. Of course, the National Cybersecurity Centre released elaborate information about how the app would operate and what the safety measures would be. And they admitted that if someone really wanted to input some data that wouldn't be realistic and create some sort of confusion, it would be possible in very particular circumstances, but the general data protection concerns were covered for this initial stage. I guess the main concerns in relation to safety were in terms of the future application of the track and trace app, and whether it would require people registered to provide increasing amounts of information that could then be utilized by the government or hacked. But there was quite an elaborate encryption mechanism. Now, having said that, the government has done a U-turn on this particular app, and they are moving to the decentralized model as well. So the decentralized model does not involve the government collecting the data, so it's up in the cloud. That obviously means that there is no centralized system that can be hacked, and people are just informed anonymously without having to provide additional information. Lisa, I don't know if you want to make any comment on that.
No, I think you've summed everything up perfectly. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And then another really great question is, can or should purposefully spreading misinformation be a crime? What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Lisa?
Yes. Short answer. I mean, obviously, this is something that's being considered within all the discussions about online harms by the UK government at the moment as well. I mean, obviously, we need to take into account context. It's all, I mean, for me, I mean, I was a bit facetious in just saying yes, because obviously the context, depending on what that is, it can obviously have different impacts and harms from it. You know, it could just be, you know, something, I mean, people, it's a well-known fact that people may put untruths about themselves out online. You know, you like to put, you know, to create a nice persona about yourself. You know, well, that is obviously, you know, a form, you know, if you knowingly do it, it could be a form of disinformation. But of course, that shouldn't necessarily be a crime. But if you're putting things out that can actually cause harm and has a greater impact, then obviously we need to look into that. So of course, context is completely specific, is obviously what's key here as well. But I think the question's really good in kind of acknowledging there's a complete difference between mis and disinformation, where people are just unknowingly passing on or sharing information that isn't untrue, or whether or not there are people that are actually deliberately trying then to pull the wool over others' eyes. I think there's obviously, we need to understand that distinction, but of course it depends on what the content is as well. Baz, is there anything you'd like to add?
There is legal framework in many countries to deal with communications that have a malevolent kind of intention in order to cause public distress and unrest. So, for example, in the UK, the Communications Act of 2003 is a relevant piece of legislation that has been used, and there's different kinds of legislation across Europe, in the US. There's also particular kinds of acts in different states in the US that prevent misinformation and deepfakes from being circulated just before elections, so that they can prevent, obviously, misinformation during election period, which is presumably even more important because it might trick people into voting for the wrong person. Yeah, I mean, we can't really say, as Lisa said, that everything can be, and I think what we're talking about here is disinformation, which has a malign kind of intention. But in many cases, we can be guilty of misinforming people if we're just sharing information that someone else has shared online, and we feel, oh, this is quite shocking, and we don't take the time to look at the article and the source of the article. So we're discussing a little bit more about that later on, so I don't want to get into it that much now. But there's definitely legislation at the moment that can be implemented to deal with fake news, and more is developed, I guess.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple more questions, but we'll look at them at the end just to keep the flow of the discussion going. So what do you think we can do to protect ourselves?
Lisa, would you like to start, and then I can jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I mean, obviously, you're saying, I mean, this is some of the advice we're saying here is not just specific to the situation with COVID. I mean, it's in general, but it's just the fact that obviously the risks are heightened currently. So, I mean, at the moment, I mean, you should always be aware of emails and messages that have come from sources that were unexpected, or people you don't know, or seem just, seem a little bit off. So always be critical of those. And obviously within those, if there's any attachments, obviously don't click on them, don't click on any links. Just be up to date with your software and your antivirus. Obviously passwords, I think this is probably such common knowledge now, but we're still, and I say we in general, but I think there's still so much complacency when it comes to passwords and using the same passwords. Actually, just having different passwords for all your accounts is just so important, and offers you so much protection. So please do so. I mean, and I fully appreciate that actually having different passwords for everything. And I think on average, I think the latest average is something like 29 different passwords, which I mean, I think that sounds incredibly small. I know for one I've got probably 4 times that amount. But I mean, just had the average. How do you remember all of those different passwords?
That's actually one of the questions that
there's
just
things like password managers that can help, and they are pretty secure. So it's just making sure that you aren't using the same one, and in particular your email as well. Just make sure that that password is the one that you really protect, because if criminals had access to your email, they've pretty much got access to your whole life. So that if you're going to start with anyway, just make sure that is the first one, and obviously go from there. Obviously things like your organizational guidelines. So if you're working from home, using that virtual private network. Things obviously making sure when you bring your own device, how secure that is. Vaz, are you okay to take over? I think my audio is going a bit funny again. Yeah. Sorry,
Okay.
I don't know if you can hear me, but everything's gone funny.
Okay, we can hear you fine. I don't know if you can hear that, but yeah, I can take over. So yeah, Lisa mentioned the bring your own device policy, which is really important, especially now that all of us are home working. We might be using our tablets or phones to log in, and in many cases, this might mean that we're using a device that we're using for all our purposes in our private life, and that can mean that we are accessing unsafe websites, and our device might be infected. So we need to make sure if we're using a device for work purposes, then this is secure, and we have the opportunity to lock it, and maybe erase the data if we lose it as well, which is important. Now it's a little bit more difficult to lose the device because we're working from home, but you never know. When you're out and about in the supermarket, you might lose your phone, for example. That might have important data on it. Purchase from trusted sites. I know I've been getting quite a lot of different sites I've never seen, from ads having these great offers for from clothing all the way to fire equipment or laptops or whatever. So my advice in general in relation to this is, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. So it is a fraudulent site. Use PayPal, and don't store your card details on your computer. I know it's very tempting to just save everything on your browser, but you need to make sure that your device is very secure in order to do that. Checking privacy settings on social media accounts is really important, and having secure passwords. I want to reiterate what Lisa said. We have loads of passwords, but there are some particular services like our social media, our email, and our banking passwords that need to be far more secure than, for example, a password that we use to register for I don't know, the Brighton Festival website, because obviously these are very, very critical services, especially the email and the online banking, and we have to make sure they're not easily reachable. Finally, I would like to highlight what we were discussing just before about fake news and misinformation, especially at this time when everyone is a little bit more stressed and a little bit more concerned about their health, and the future of employment and how our lives are going to be in the next few months and how COVID is unfolding in different countries. I think it's important to check the validity of our sources before sharing information online. It's very tempting to have these sites that include clickbait headlines. And by clickbait, I mean headlines that are specifically written in a way that would make you click on them because they promise something very extravagant in terms of the news that the site would include. But in many cases, these websites can have inaccurate information, pseudoscience, or even plain straight misinformation or disinformation. So we need to make sure that we're only sharing information on our social media from reputable sources. Can we go to the next slide, Theodore? Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Can I add something to that?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah.
No, I just wanted to just make one sort of final point about this. So obviously we're saying advice about protecting ourselves, but I think it's also really important not to place the onus of responsibility onto individual users, because I'd never want to kind of say, well, if things go wrong, then you're to blame, because we're all human, we're not infallible, we can make mistakes. And also I think something else that's really significant that's come out from COVID is how inequities have been highlighted. So often we talk about things like digital divide, and that's very much centered around access. But if you consider that you might have households that only has, like, for example, one smartphone or one device, limited data allowance, then that household's not possible to function appropriately. And also, so really, what we're thinking about here is the impact of poverty, and that kind of, and digital literacy. For example, in the UK, there are 11 million adults without digital skills. So when we talk about protecting ourselves, there's so many people that actually just, things that we're speaking about is not accessible. It doesn't actually make sense. So there's that real issue then of the lack of digital skills and knowledge, but also just things like digital culture and civility as well. And I think because obviously more people have, as Vaz noted on an earlier slide, there's that real rapid kind of transition to working, living on, communicating, to staying in touch. How do you see your families? How do you have that contact? And across different ages as well, and demographics, that I think as well, that I think is really significant and important, not to just sort of say, the responsibility is on users.
A really good question that just came in now is, would people decide not to report being a victim of a cybercrime?
I think my audio's dropped again. I can't hear anybody.
We can hear you, Lisa, but maybe you can't. Theodore, would you like to ask the question again?
Yes, of course. So would people decide not to report being a victim of a cybercrime out of shame or feeling foolish?
Yes. So we mentioned that we've done research with different groups in the community and different organizations. And one constant theme is that people feel that they don't want to report cybercrime, either because, as you say, they're ashamed, or because they find the reporting mechanisms to be not very easy to use, or when they feel that there's no point in reporting if someone has been defrauded by someone. They might feel, the police has more important things to do, especially during COVID. They're not going to bother with my £50 that I lost. And we've seen that very explicitly in our research with older people when we were asking them, why haven't you reported to the police? What happened to you? Many answered that they felt it wasn't that important, even if the amount of money they lost was quite significant, because they felt that the police had more important things to deal with. So I think in that sense, yeah, a lot of people feel either ashamed or that it's not worth the trouble. And I guess for organizations, it's even more important because reporting cybercrime might mean that there is a reputational impact as well that might cost them their business. because their customers might not want to interact with them anymore, or might not trust them as much. So it is quite a significant problem how to convince more people and more organizations to report cybercrime when it happens. Lisa, I don't know if you can hear us, and if you can, if you would like to add. Okay.
Yeah, and so to add to what Vaz said, I mean, and again, there's obviously there's different types of cyber crimes. And there are some that are particularly more stigmatized, particularly those involving any sort of sexual aspects. So unfortunately, we're seeing a major increase in crimes such as sexploitation, where people are basically pulled into posing in front of a webcam or sending nude photographs of themselves, or even that their device has been hacked and private photos have been stolen from them, and then they're essentially blackmailed into paying to stop those photos being distributed. And I mean, often people will do it. Often people will pay because they you know, the thought of obviously going and reporting that, just the embarrassment that they were fooled in the first instance as well is particularly stigmatizing. And I think there's also a gendered aspect as well. Particularly what we're seeing is that it's more young men who are being targeted in this particular heinous type of crime. And of course, I think for them to kind of come forward as well, that's particularly it's particularly hard for them. And actually, there's been some really tragic cases. Actually, some young men have actually committed suicide because of this, because actually they don't have the money to pay up, and they, you know, the embarrassment that they're facing, that they felt that there was no other way out. So and actually, from reports, seeing that this type of crime again is increasing with COVID.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to next slide.
Yeah, so this is these are our contact details. You can email us or send us a message, connect with us on LinkedIn in order to maybe follow all the different talks and events that we take part in. This has also included her Twitter. And we've also included the information for the Cybercrime Awareness Clinic, where you can find advice and guidance. You can read our report from the first phase of our project. And if you have any issues or any questions, you can contact us, especially if you're in the UK. If you're abroad, it might be a little bit more difficult for us to provide support on an international level.
There are a few questions that we've got on the questions box, if we can go over them as well. So the first one would be going back to the Dual Awards and the course itself. What could be the other part of the MSc Dual Award in addition to cybercrime?
Okay,
I'll answer that. Yeah.
I'll take this. So with distance learning, so we offer it at campus and distance learning. So I'm the program area for distance learning. There are some, with cybercrime, currently it's only available through this framework on a campus-based study. We are looking to launch a distance learning cybercrime course next year. That won't be part of this framework where you do where you can study something else alongside it though. But with distance learning, the pathways, I'm really going to have to remember all of these now. So it's crime science, counter fraud, security management, criminal justice, international criminal justice, criminology, criminal psychology, victimology. And then with campus, you can there's no victimology, but there is cybercrime. Oh, and you can also do intelligence as well, but that is not a master's on its own. That can only be studied in conjunction with one of the other subjects. So there are some slight discrepancies on what you can study on the master's framework, but the website will highlight all of that. And if you've got any particular questions, I'm more than happy if you email me and I can answer something specifically then as well.
Okay, brilliant. And the next question is, can students do a placement or internship with the stakeholders that you collaborate with?
Shall I take this, Lisa?
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah, so yes is the short answer. If you are joining us for the undergraduate, then there are opportunities for placements that come up on a regular basis. So we have a placement center that offers different opportunities for placements with different stakeholders. We're not the only ones collaborating with the stakeholders we mentioned. So the department has a very elaborate kind of network of stakeholders in the community that we work with, and there are opportunities. But in terms of joining the stakeholders, you get the opportunity, if you join the undergraduate or even the master's, to become part of the Cybercrime Awareness Clinic, and obviously help out in the research projects that we're involved in, or even do some public engagement with us. So this is an immediate kind of opportunity for a very practical placement that will familiarize you with how things work in the regular kind of world of cybercrime. And you will meet people in law enforcement agencies, and you will have the opportunity to ask questions and maybe even pursue an internship later on. But there's definitely opportunities when we're working with the different stakeholders to say, okay, there is a research project that needs to be done. So you can, for example, choose to do your dissertation as part of working with these organizations as well. Lisa, would you like to add something about the masters?
No, absolutely. And just on that final point, so you have the option to do a dissertation or a major project. So if you were working with one of the collaborators, for example, I mean, it could be that actually do a major project which is directed through your engagement with them, and so it takes on a sort of different format to your usual dissertation. And ordinarily, it's very much centered around a research topic that is of the organization's interest, is something that they need addressing, basically.
Okay, thank you. And Vas, you may have answered this already, but can students on the BSc Criminology and Cybercrime be part of the Cybercrime Awareness Clinic?
Yes, so we have the Cybercrime Awareness Clinic there as an optional module for students to join. So in your second year, you have the opportunity to pick the Cybercrime Awareness Clinic as one of your optional modules, and then you get attached to the clinic, and we identify a project that you would like to work on, and we give you some tasks, and we're working together, and that might involve you are doing some research for some particular research project that we're involved in, or you are co-developing a new project with the clinic team, or even taking part in the community engagement activities that we've mentioned, going out to schools, community groups, and offering advice and helping us prepare the presentations that we're doing, find new resources for support for our site, help with the social media and all that. So it's a very, very holistic kind of experience that you can have, and we try to tailor it to your interests as well because of the diverse mix of projects that we have with the clinic.
Okay,
Lisa,
thank you.
Do you want to add something to that? Lisa, can you hear us? We can't hear you.
I think she's got some audio problems as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are two more questions which will be good to cover.
Yeah.
So can an employee or a student clicking on I think that's phishing email start a university ransomware attack?
Yes, obviously phishing emails have all sorts of different goals and purposes, but infecting a network with malware is certainly one of them. So in most cases, ransomware will start in a similar way, where someone has clicked on an attachment that had the malware integrated into the attachment, or clicked on a link that infected the system. So definitely phishing is really important to tackle for every organization because of the various risks that it can involve, from losing data through a ransomware attack all the way to losing loads of money. There's phishing attacks that presumably come from the CEO of the company to the finance department, and they ask the finance department to pay certain invoices that are obviously non-existent in reality, and they go to fraudsters' bank accounts instead. So definitely something to look out for. Lisa, I don't know if you can hear us and would like to comment.
Apologies, I missed the question, and I now realise what is going on with my technical difficulties. There is work being done further on up my street by a network provider, so that's what's knocking me out all the time. I do apologise.
Okay. So, Theodore, would you like to repeat the question for Lisa?
Yes, of course. So it is, can an employee or a student clicking on a phishing email start a university ransomware attack?
I mean, so the short answer is yes. I mean, hopefully that we have the security that basically the email, the infected email, should never reach the student's inbox in the first instance. But yes, I mean, there's obviously ways that things can breach and get through. So there is always that risk about it. Yeah, so the problem is it's the fact that, I mean, again, it goes back to the fact that we're all human, we can all make mistakes, that awareness and education, that we don't actually know what we're looking for, or and particularly in the current situation where everybody's juggling so many different challenges at the moment. We're trying to be at home, that it's quite easy to under these conditions just sort of click on something and inadvertently click on something. But when it comes to sort of big organization, there is that sort of day-to-day practice that we can sort of maintain, but actually there is that expectation as well that you're looking at, there should be the security as well. But obviously it's not all about the security. There's the social aspects as to why cybercrime happens as well.
I think it's important to note that as well, and I didn't hear that, Theodore, when you first asked the question, that students clicking on a phishing email, as Lisa said, it would be the filters picking up the phishing email in the first place, so they probably wouldn't get that to begin with. But the students don't have access to the internal kind of systems as well, so it would be very likely that they could infect their own computers with malware when they click on an attachment of a phishing link, but perhaps not the university. This would be possible perhaps for academic staff or admin staff or university staff in general have access to the internal systems. And obviously that creates a bigger risk for the organizations. But we have to highlight that big organizations have security providers and information security officers that look out for threats like that and prepare the organization to tackle those.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question that we've got is the cybercrime degree valuable, recognized if you want to find employment in a different country?
Lisa, would you like to address that? And then I can jump in.
Sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Yes. Is the cybercrime degree valuable or recognized if you want to find employment in a different country?
Well, yes, is the short answer again. Obviously we're talking about a global issue. So yeah, cybercrime, it affects everybody internationally. So if you have a qualification, skills, understanding of this field, you've got something that's invaluable. And as we're talking today, that the threats are growing, and there is a massive shortfall with people with the knowledge and skills to tackle the threats and the problems as well. So absolutely. And in the fact as well that there are more and more courses coming up. The courses that we established were the first ones in the UK, and we're seeing more universities launch these. So they're obviously recognizing the need as well to educate people in this particular area. I mean, it is absolutely recognised elsewhere, and certainly the students that we've had on, particularly with the masters, the majority are international based students. So I've had students from all over the world. Actually, some of them are already working in law enforcement and wanted to specialise in the field of cybercrime, and take those skills back to their country, and further their careers. So yes, basically it is. I mean, it is incredibly valuable for people all over the world.
I think it's also important to note that when we created these courses in collaboration with law enforcement and other agencies and stakeholders that are relevant to fighting cybercrime. And what we've tried to do is actually address the gaps that we could see in law enforcement when the police, for example, was coming to us saying we need more police officers that understand what cybercrime is and can deal with the problem, and they are able to identify what digital evidence is and try to resolve cases and support the victims. And this is also very important. Even if you can't resolve a case of fraud because it might be a very small amount done, perpetrated by an offender that is abroad and you can't extradite them, it's still important for law enforcement to be aware of the problems and the issues the victims face and to be able to support the victims. So what we said in relation to the courses was that we wanted to create courses that would help us educate the police investigators and the law enforcement agents of the 21st century in relation to that. And obviously, we're not really talking just about law enforcement. We're talking about working in cybersecurity organizations or for the cybersecurity sector in general, and also doing research in this area. Policy is a very important area that is currently developing in all sorts of different offences, as we said, fake news or sexual offences online. And therefore, being knowledgeable in this area could get you a job in a government organization or a research organization that you can then find very pleasing, and your degree would be very valuable in getting you that.
Okay, thank you very much. We don't have any more questions that people have sent us, so would you like to say any final words to our viewers today?
Yeah, I would like to thank everyone for attending. I hope you found that useful, and hopefully we'll see you in the future or hear from you in terms of any questions you might have further to our degrees or any other cybercrime related issues, and you can contact us using the information that you can see on the screen. I think we have the slides still there. Lisa, can you hear us?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you everybody, and apologies again for my technical difficulties. I hope you found the talk helpful and useful, and just stay safe.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes. Thank you everyone for joining us. If you need anything, just get in touch with us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.